Good morning, thank you for joining us. Today we've got a tropical cyclone on its way. Couple of days time it'll be approaching the coast, but we're already getting very strong winds. We're getting a lot of questions on how to weatherproof your hive in really windy conditions. So what we're going to do is step inside and we'll go over different ways to make sure your hive is secure if you've got really strong winds coming in to your region. So here we'll get out of the wind and the rain and just run through a few different things you might like to check with your hive. And if you've got questions, put it in the comments and we'll get to answering those. So here, first of all, let's start with the ground. So you want to make sure your hive is on something solid. So if you are just on the earth and the earth is getting really sodden with all of the rain, then you might find your hive will start to go on a lean. It's much more likely to tip over. So first things first, make sure you're on some solid footings. So if you are just in a garden bed or something like that, then put a paver under each leg or a piece of wood or anything you like, just to spread the load and make sure your hive isn't going to lean over. That's the number one reason why a hive falls over, is the feet sinking into the ground. And the next thing is to consider what's going on with your hive. So normally a hive, if it's fully functioning, will be glued together nicely by the bees with their propolis. And that means they rarely actually do blow over, even in really quite strong winds. However, the gabled roof, we find, if you haven't locked it down, if you're in 80 km/h plus winds, like our hives are very exposed here and it comes up the slope, that's when we found that our classic roofs would start to blow off. And that's why we put these wing locks here on our Flow Hive 2+. So if you have that, then make sure you're doing up these. They can be quite firm to do up. If you need to, use a pair of pliers on them, secure it down, test your roof, make sure it's solid, and that way it won't blow away in strong winds. If you've got a cyclone coming like we do here, approaching the coast over the next 2 days, then what we need to do is make sure our hive is secure yet again by putting some straps around it. Now, if you've got our classic, or you just want to take that extra step to make sure the roof's going to stay on, then you could strap right around the hive like this. So if you do strap in this direction, then bearing in mind you don't want to really pull the tension up. If you've got one of those ratchet straps, you may snap the edge off your roof. But this type of strap with the little cam buckle will be enough to keep your roof on even in really strong winds. So if you've got a classic without the roof locks, this is a good idea to put a strap around like this. Pull that up so you've got a bit of a tension, but not overboard, because we don't want to snap this edge off. Now if you want to take that a step further and you really do want to put a lot of tension on your roof, another option is to go in the diagonal direction. So this is a ratchet strap, and that will put a lot of tension here on your roof and will really make sure it's locked down in a cyclone, and will keep your whole hive together. So these ones, what you want to do is make sure you're crossing on a diagonal across the top of your roof here. Now this is a much stronger direction to strap, where you don't have to worry about the gabled roof edges snapping on the shingles here. So you take up the slack, and these have a lot of power to hold your hive together in extreme scenarios. So there's a few options for you. Of course, there's considerations. If you've got the weather guard on, then you won't be able to strap this way. Just going back a step, we do find that our hives don't blow over as long as they're on a nice footing and not going to sink and tip over. The bees usually glue them together. We do have these available, which might be a good long-term solution if you do get exposed to very high winds often. You can add our latches here. You can use hardware store ones, or we've got our purpose-built nice brass latches available now. And then don't forget the roof locks here. Any questions coming in?
Yeah, so a lot of questions coming in. The most common one is, what should I do if my hive does happen to tip over?
So, occasionally hives do tip over. Sometimes livestock will knock them over, or as I said, some really soggy earth underneath, and the hive goes on the lean and eventually tips over. They're the most common reasons. Try and get it back up on its feet in this position on the same day if you can. If left on its side for too long, your bees can abscond, or you can run into issues where the comb is squashed against comb in the brood nest, and the hive beetles take advantage where the bees can't reach those sections where the comb is pressed against another piece of comb, and it can all turn into a hive beetle nest instead of a beehive, which is a mess to clean up. So get it back on its feet quickly as you can. Of course, the bees might be pretty upset with the scenario, so you're in your bee suit, you're wearing your gloves, you've got your smoker out, and you're putting your hive back together.
Awesome. Elizabeth on Facebook is asking, do you recommend straps or latches more? She has trouble with the feeder shim that the bees don't have access to.
Feeder shim?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure what she means by that.
Okay. You can go either way. I think if you're concerned and you don't have a setup with latches and the roof's not locking on, or it doesn't have the roof locks, then simply put a strap around it. You could probably just go sideways, and that'll be enough to hold it all together. Or if you do have an extreme cyclonic weather system like we have here, then strapping this way will be stronger again.
Great. There's also a question coming through asking if you should ever move your hive inside to protect it.
Now, moving inside has the issue where the bees then, as they fly, will be then inside, which is not ideal. We do have an inside hive just over here, but they have access to the outside world. If you have a look at this, here's an observation hive here, where the bees are going in and out here and out into the world. So some people do keep their hives like this, and we can have a look and see how they're going in here. And it's a nice thing to have an observation hive. We have found a little tip with observation hives is keep the pipe really short. A really long tube seems to hamper their ability to properly control ventilation. But that's pretty neat there, being able to see right into the hive like that, and indoors. But yes, you could, if you're really worried, I suppose, get up nice and early, block the entrance and move your hive inside. Bees will be okay with the blocked entrance as long as they have lots of ventilation. Take out the tray for maximum ventilation in that scenario, and then you can move your hive. I wouldn't go much longer than 24 hours though, because you'll find the bees will get quite stressed. I've done all sorts of things like that, taking bees onto the TEDx stage and all of that by blocking the entrance. And I did find that with all of that movement and travel and blocking the entrance for a long time, that the bees did get a bit stressed, because I saw that they ejected some of the young brood the following day. So just be mindful of stress on the hive as well. Keep them closed for 24 hours is okay, but longer, I wouldn't do that.
Great, Seeds. Scott Bray's just tuned in. He's asking, would it be a good time to put the entrance excluder on if it isn't on already?
Entrance reducer is not a bad idea. It does help protect the driving rain coming on. So here's our entrance reducer here, which you can simply fit to your hive with these little L screws. If you want to take it a step further, you can actually screw it in more permanently as well with these screw holes.
Awesome. Happy Hounds in Ireland is saying the observation hive is amazing. Someone else is asking how long we've had that hive running for.
That hive's been running there for about 1.5 years, I think, and we did find it was struggling a bit, and we shortened the tube. So that's a top tip. We found they did much better with a short tube going to the outside world. They can control their ventilation more, and they're doing well now, which is great. And before that, this particular hive was in the Harvest Cafe up the road. So, and it was there for a couple of years. And they had similar issues because it was a long tube going right up the wall and out. And we actually found that it was susceptible to chalk brood because they weren't able to really adequately control their ventilation.
Thanks, Seeds. Another question coming in, do I need to feed my bees while it's raining?
Not usually. The honeybee is an extraordinary species which builds up stores in order to survive many months of cold. So that's what honey stores are. If you find your hive has no stores at all, everything's dry in there, there's none in the super, there's none in the brood, then that's the time when beekeepers will feed to make sure they have something to survive if they're really hungry. Even though sugar is not the best for bees, it's still okay, and you're better off feeding them sugar than letting them starve.
Awesome.
So keep those questions coming in. Today we are discussing weatherproofing your hive. We have Tropical Cyclone Alfred just offshore here, and a lot of people in the area are preparing for what it may bring, strong winds, floods, etc. And preparing your hive is a good idea by making sure that your hive is secure on its footing and the roof is nice and secure with your wing locks if you have those, or if you want to take it the next step, putting straps around it just to hold it all together.
Another question coming in, Seeds, I think they may have just joined a bit late, but they're asking, do I place my ratchet strap around my entire hive and over the roof, or do I place it around the hive and the undercover?
Okay, so you can do either in this case. You're quite right, you could ratchet strap by taking the roof off and then putting the roof back on to give shelter and then locking your wing screws down. That's another option again. Generally we find that the roofs don't blow off provided you've got these wing locks done up and the hive doesn't come apart provided the bees have been in there for a while and they've sealed with their propolis and glued everything together. We find that's enough. However, if you don't have these wing locks or the roof isn't secure, then a simple strap around this way will hold it on, and that the issue with that though is if you use a ratchet strap, this is just your simple cam buckle. If you use a ratchet strap and you really crank that, then you might crack the edges off these shingles. So a better idea if you do want to put a lot of pressure to strap it down, I mean this is suitable to hold your roof on. It can't really go anywhere even with a mild amount of tension. So that's all people normally do. However, we were discussing a method of going right over the top of the hive in this direction. So you can put a lot of tension on the roof this way and you're going diagonally across the roof like that, and that will really hold everything together if you are concerned and you've got very strong winds approaching from the cyclone.
Thanks, Seeds. Interior Sam's written in, he's saying he'll be strapping his hive today and thank you for the advice. And Happy Hounds is asking, he's got his hive on brick blocks. Is it a good idea in stormy weather to block off the gap where the legs are to stop the wind from getting underneath? and possibly knocking the hive over?
We haven't found that to be an issue. We haven't found hives blow over unless the footing isn't solid. So it sounds like you've got a solid footing, which is the main thing. Put a paver under each leg or a piece of wood or whatever you've got to make sure your hive isn't going to lean over as the legs sink into your garden bed or the ground below. That's the main thing. Generally, hives don't blow over. Certainly I haven't had trouble with that.
Awesome. Scott Bray's just got one more question. He's asking about ventilation. Should the ventilation slot at the back of the hive be in the closed position due to the expected rain?
Not necessarily. We actually find that even in extreme places, you'll hear in North America where you've got, bullet winds and really, minus 30 degrees, that some beekeepers will go open mesh bottom boards all year round and they never get a complaint from the bees. Seems hard to believe, but from that perspective, for us in the more temperate climates, I don't think we have to worry about the bees getting cold.
Would you recommend lifting a hive onto Besser blocks and strapping the hive to the bricks?
You certainly could. So if you want to strap your hive to something, then that's the next step again in terms of stability. So Besser blocks do have that nice hole through them that you could put a strap through, and that would provide extra weight. So that's a nice tip there.
Awesome. A lot of people are really interested in the observational hive. Scott Martin's written in, he's asking how if you ever check the frames and look for the queen. It's a really interesting setup you've got.
Yeah, so this is actually half a flow hive cut down the middle and then put vertical. So we've got the same amount as our typical setup with a single brood and a single super, but it's been pushed vertically. So we can't see every frame surface. Some people's observation hives, they tile out every frame. We wanted to make it just a bit more cozy for the bees, because often in observation hives the bees do struggle a bit. So what we've done is half a hive here, and it's pretty neat. You can get in here and watch what's going on. You can see some communication by the bees, see some waggle dances. You can see brood under their feet here, which is good, and really get an idea of what's going on in the hive. There's a lot of honey in this frame, which is great, and this hive's doing well.
So good. Martha on TikTok, she's just joined us and she's wanting to get bees herself, but she's wondering if she got them, would her neighbour's house be covered in bees?
Unlikely. You can get into a situation in springtime where your bees do their natural thing and half the bees will kick out the old queen, a swarm ball will fly off like a cloud in the air and land somewhere. So that is the situation where in the springtime you might get a ball of bees landing somewhere around while they temporarily land looking for a home to move to. So at that point, the scout bees flying out, measuring cavities in trees or wall cavities or whatever they can find, and then they'll go to that location. So you could get into a situation keeping bees where a swarm does land at your neighbour's place, and it's about reassurance, giving them some honey and keeping them sweet. They're usually not aggressive in that swarm phase, and they will move on within a day. But what you want to do is keep good relations so that they'll let you know if a swarm lands, so that you can get out your brood box and catch that swarm, and then you have another hive. But better still, you've done your spring management and you're unlikely to get a colony swarming by getting in there in the spring and making sure there's enough space. Also harvesting honey in the springtime, making sure there's enough space in your hive, and that way you're less likely to get that swarm of bees crossing over and potentially bothering your neighbours. Having said that, there are more honeybee colonies around than you might expect. There's several usually around everybody's, whether they're in a wall cavity, a chimney or tree, so we have the honeybees around anyway. Beekeeping is a wonderful thing that is and does get a lot of people do keep bees in suburbia, even in sky rises on balconies, in the cities on rooftops and in backyards. So it is a very popular thing to do, and keeping in touch with your neighbours and giving them some honey is a great idea. Everyone loves honey.
Love it, Seeds. Everyone's loving this inside hive. We've got another question. What about having animals, particularly dogs, near a flow hive? Does that work?
So there seems to be two approaches with animals. If you've got a dog that is curious, you can either fence off your hive. So some people create a little fence around their hive to make sure their dog's not going to go near it. And other people just simply let their dog learn. They won't stick their nose in the entrance too many times because they'll get a sting on the nose.
Awesome.
So a little up to you on that trajectory.
We've got someone else tuning in from Nigeria. They're thinking about starting beekeeping as well. They're asking which bees produce the best honey.
Fantastic, Nigeria. Do let us know where you are in the world. It's super interesting to us because we have a community of beekeepers all over the world now. And certainly you can keep bees everywhere where, you can keep flow hives everywhere where honeybees are being kept, which is all areas except for the poles where there is no flowers.
Awesome. We've got another question on the observation hive. Is there just one queen inside that hive?
Yes, generally you can get into a situation where there is multiple queens. It's usually a temporary situation. Generally a hive has a single queen and her job is to lay eggs. So after her initial mating flight, she carries enough sperm to lay up to 2,000 eggs a day, and she can live up to 6 years, which is incredible considering she started off the same as the worker bees, which only last 6 weeks. She got fed royal jelly for her entire larvae stage, whereas the workers on day 3 got fed plant proteins in the form of bee bread, which is made from pollen. And that is the genetic switch to change a worker bee into a queen. And she's supersized and can last up to 6 years. So a single queen is a really important part of the hive, and probably the most common issue with the hive is, for whatever reason, they've lost the queen and they usually make a new one, but if they don't get that together, then you have a queenless hive that you need to introduce a new queen to.
Thanks, Seeds. Getting back to the topic of today's live, we've actually had a viewer on TikTok, Have the Day You Deserve is their handle. They've just messaged, they're from East Texas and their flow hive actually blew over the other morning. It's okay, she hasn't found the queen. They had gusts of up to 60 miles per hour. So I guess a good point to touch on, how to help secure your hive in strong winds.
Okay, great. We covered a lot of this early on. So the main reason hives do blow over, I'm interested to hear the particular setup. So that's getting a reasonably strong wind, but we had those winds here this morning. We had 98 kilometres an hour, which is getting close to that level. And we find our hives generally don't blow over unless they have an unsure footing. So starting down here, making sure your hive is nice and level, and you've got a paver or some wood or some kind of firm surface under these feet so the hive can't tip over. And you can go a step further. I mean, if you've got our flow hub too, you've got these wing locks, tie them down to keep the roof on. Use some pliers if you need to really do them up. Make sure it's firm. You can add latches to the hive if you want to, or you can simply put a strap around it, and that will help secure your hive. You can go this way. It's interesting to hear your experience there. Let us know whether the hive had a solid footing. And strapping this way, just be careful not to snap this edge off the hive. You can put mild pressure on it, but not a huge amount. Or you can strap in the front to back direction and get a lot more, using a ratchet strap, a lot more hold down. Someone chimed in earlier, and the way they've set it up is by putting Besser blocks, which have the hole through them, concrete blocks, and you put one of them under each feet and put the straps right through the Besser blocks to really give it a lot of hold down if you've got cyclonic conditions.
Thanks, Cedar. We've got Bert. He's on the Northern Rivers as well, currently wet as we know. His bee box is secure, but he's wondering if he should supplement their food or just leave them be.
So generally a hive has stores, and I would say you would too in this area have some stores in the hive, whether they be in the brood box or the super, and your colony will be fine. They could last months with their stores, so you generally don't have to feed them in rainy times unless you happen to have a really weak colony with no stores at all.
Another question coming in, how do I safely move my hive so that I can tether it to my veranda posts?
Okay, so moving a hive, obviously be careful around hives. Some hives really don't like being moved, and others you can just pick up without a problem. But don't take any chances. Wear your bee suit and gloves and give them some smoke first. Now, there's some considerations when moving a hive. Obviously, you're going to need 2 strong people to lift a hive that's got honey in it and it's heavy. So the considerations are the bee's ability to geolocate to their spot. So if you just pick up a hive and move it across the other side of your yard, you get a whole lot of bees returning to the old spot where your hive was. So there is a couple of different ways to deal with the issue of the bees geolocating to that spot. The conventional method is you get your hive, you close it up in the early morning, you take it away for a month, more than 4 miles, 6 kilometres away, so they forget all of their landmarks, and then bring it back a month later and put it in your new location. Now that's quite a lot of work, so what I tend to do is a disorientation technique where I'll move it straight across the yard in one go, and I'll put a whole lot of branchy material at the front, at the entrance, or even tape an old shirt around the hive, making sure they do have some access out still. But what will happen is bees will come out incredibly enthusiastically to go foraging. Now hit this branch or the shirt and go, hang on, something's changed, something's different. And that triggers them to reorientate to that new location. And that works pretty well. You might end up with 5% of the foragers back at the old location. You can either choose to leave them be and work it out, or you can actually put a box of any description there, and those bees will build up and you can ferry them across to the new location. So that is far less work than moving it 6 miles away and back again a month later. Another method for moving hives is bit by bit. If you move less than, say, 2 meters at a time, the bees will follow. So you could do that up to twice a day, moving the hive a little bit, and the forager bees come back and they adjust to the new location. Move it again, and you can creep your hive across the yard that way. So that's another good technique.
Awesome, thanks Seeds. Another question coming in asking for tips to keep the rain out of my hive. Is it worth wrapping the outside of my hive to keep it out temporarily?
No, you'll find the bees will do a good job of sealing up their hive, and you won't get rain going into the hive except for where it can drive in the entrance. Now, entrance reducer will help if you've got a lot of driving rain coming in, but what we've done is with our flow hive too is we've put a screen bottom board. In fact, all our flow hives have screen bottom boards, and that way you won't get the age-old problem of water pooling inside the hive and drowning bees. The water goes through the screen bottom board and into your tray, and then it'll overflow below. So at no stage is it pooling inside the hive where the bees are. So all you'll need to do is empty out your tray from time to time. Make sure it's not sitting there full of water, and just give that a little clean from time to time, and that seems to not cause any issues. We've also sloped the landing board to limit how much water can go in, but if you've got driving rain coming in the entrance, it will still come in. So all my hives at home don't have, they're down in the valley and they don't get water in there, but the hives up here are facing with the predominant wind direction with the rain driving in, so they do get water in the trays. So it depends a little bit on the situation or where you have situated your hive.
Awesome. Happy Hounds is asking how long the cyclone is due to be around, and if we know what wind speeds we're likely to get around here.
So at the moment they're forecasting up to 150 kilometres an hour, which is a Category 2 cyclone where you've got minor damage to structures. So it's hard to know. Weather is unpredictable, but they're not at the moment forecasting a Category 3 or 4. So that's good news. It will bring a lot of rain, so the forecast is for flooding in the region. So we've been very busy. Right now we're putting everything up in the low-lying areas. People are filling sandbags, and everyone in flood-prone areas is preparing. So we're very busy here in the Northern Rivers. We have had some very bad floods with a lot of losses, and we're hoping, fingers crossed, that it won't be that bad this time.
Awesome, Seeds. We've got a couple in Sydney, New South Wales. They're asking is there a perfect time of year to set up a hive, and how do you get the bees?
So at the time of year you can get your bees is a great time to get started. Now, one thing you do want to do before you order your bees is make sure you have your equipment ready. You don't want to be caught out with you've got your package or your nucleus of bees from a beekeeper or a bee breeder, and you don't have your hive ready to go. So get your equipment, get it all set up. Now, depending on which way you get started will really determine whether you have bees available. If you just purchase a hive that's already in full size, you can basically do that any time of year in the Sydney region. And then you'll be swapping those bees into your flow hive. If you start with what's called a nucleus, they're generally available in the spring and summertime, so you still might be able to find nucleuses from breeders and get started that way, and that's probably one of the easiest ways to get started. You get your equipment, you get your brood box, which is the bottom box here. You pick up your nucleus, which is a going little mini hive. You situate it where you want to keep your hive in your yard, and then on a nice sunny day, get out your bee suit and smoker, transfer those bees into the bottom box, look after them, and they'll grow from there. And once they've really filled out this bottom box and they're using all the frames, you can then go ahead and put on the top box our honey super, and in our case it's our flow frame invention, allowing you to harvest the honey directly from the hive. There are other ways to get started. Taking splits would be more of a springtime activity in most places, where you'll often be helping a beekeeper because they've got a hive really building up that may swarm. So if you can go and take a split, take some of the frames out of the bottom box and put them into your hive, and you can either introduce a mated queen from a breeder or let them raise their own, provided there's eggs down the cells, and you can start that way. So that's a good springtime way to start beekeeping too.
Awesome. On that note, Nathan's written in, he's saying, I had bees at my house in a tree. Could I use those bees or would I have to buy new bees?
You can, but it's quite difficult to get them out of a tree. In wall cavities, typically people will do what's called a cutout, and they'll actually take the cladding off the wall and cut out the brood sections of comb and put them into the bottom box using rubber bands to hold them into the wooden frames, and they can start from that. In a tree cavity, it's a little bit harder where you're not cutting apart the tree, so you need to create what's called a one-way bee valve, where you get a pipe and you might make it clear so that you can see what's going on, and you make kind of like a cone of fly wire that the bees can easily go through one way and not the other way. And then you put your box outside and you make sure that the exit path from the tree is only through your hive, and the one-way bee valve will then end up with all of the bees in your box. Well, most of the bees. And I have had that work, and eventually a queen came out and joined the colony on the outside. However, that is pretty unreliable and a bit of work to achieve. Arborists, my brother's an arborist, and one way they get bees out of a tree hollow, if they want to get them out, is they throw in a cat and dog flea collar, or even stronger is a cattle tick ear tag, and that'll actually not kill the bees, but it'll sufficiently annoy them to move home. And if you happen to be there at the right time when they're absconding, you could then shake those bees off the branch they temporarily land on into your brood box and start that way. So that's another tip. I have had success with getting bees out of a wall cavity, just by making a tiny little incision and poking those collars in. And that can work, or you might like to combine the two, where they're coming out through the clear tube, one-way bee valve, and you put the collars in the cavity to drive the bees out.
Great. We've got Miss Strange on TikTok who's written in, I've inherited a flow hive and I don't know what to do with it. I'm in a city, is it possible to still have bees?
Absolutely. City beekeeping is very popular, and often people in the city brag that they get a longer honey season and a lot more of a variety of different honeys due to all of the different things people plant in the cities. So you'll find them on rooftops in New York, you'll find them in balconies, in high rises, you'll find them in urban backyards. Beekeeping is this wonderful thing that only takes up this small footprint, and with a flow hive you've got this advantage. You don't actually need a room in your house or a laundry or a shed dedicated to a honey processing facility. The honey extraction equipment is built right in with our flow frame invention, and you are then able to harvest honey directly out of the hive, bypassing the need for that whole setup with your centrifuges and decapping benches and buckets of sieving and mess and all of that.
Amazing. While you've got the top box open there, Seeds, we've got a few people asking what the difference is between the bottom and the top of the hive.
Okay, great. So in the bottom box is basically a conventional Langstroth hive with wooden frames. And we like to keep it perfectly natural for the bees, just letting them draw the comb themselves. You can put foundation in those frames if you want to. So I'm just going to undo these latches and show you what is down the bottom if we do have brood frames in there. Let's just have a look and see, yes, the brood frames are in here. So if you have a look at some of our live streams, we're getting right in here with the bees, taking out frames, and you'll see their work here on these wooden frames. They will hang their comb from these comb guides or you can put foundation sheets in if you wish. I like to just let them do it naturally, because as a flow hive beekeeper we don't need to put these frames in a centrifuge, therefore we don't need the bracing of a plastic sheet or wax and wire. So that works very nicely and allows the bees just to make the comb themselves the way they've always done here in the brood nest. So if we come across here, you'll see those wooden frames that have been populated by the bees, and they've created their wax. You can hardly see it because this hive's very healthy and there's a lot of bees all over the comb surface. Give us a thumbs up if beneath the feet you can see the honeycomb and even some of the brood. So it's only just, let's try up here. So here is our flow frame. So that's the difference between what's in the bottom and the top. Here we give them a partially formed honeycomb matrix, which is my father and I's invention. Allows you to turn a handle and the honey flows right out of the hive while you can watch the bees still doing their work. We can have a closer look at that by pulling out one of these frames in this top box. So getting back to your question, here in the top box I will need to undo our roof locks because we've been talking cyclone protection here, just by undoing them a little in order to be able to take off the roof. Okay, so that roof should come off now, and we have our inner cover here, and then under that we have our flow frames. So this really changed the game in terms of being able to harvest honey directly from the hive, which wasn't possible before. My father and I spent a decade developing these. And do we have a flow key anywhere about, we can show you how this frame works. So basically, in a nutshell, the bees will cover this all in wax, coating it all, joining all of the little parts together, and then you come from the outside of the hive with your flow key, and you'll be able to see this last cell lift just by turning a key, and now you see the zigzagging channels there where the honey flows down and out of the hive. They also do store honey down in the bottom box here, down in the brood nest as well, where you can collect some honeycomb, or you can collect honeycomb from under the roof, or add another whole box dedicated to honeycomb collection.
And Nathan's asking, Seeds, what is the max honey storage in a flow hive?
So it's similar to conventional beekeeping. So these, when they're full, are around about 3 kilograms of honey. And in this case, we have 7 of them, so there's 21 kilograms of honey in this box that you could harvest. And around here, we can usually do that a couple of times a year. So it's incredible when you think about how many bee flights have to take place in order to create that honey. A single bee working hard, flying every day for a couple of weeks, flying 3 kilometers or more on one single flight, and might do multiple a day, might only produce 1/4 teaspoon of honey. So they're busy bees, as they say, and they're just such extraordinary little pollinators, and there just isn't anything else on the planet that can do the level of pollination that Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, can do. A hive like this could pollinate 50 million flowers in a day, and that's just extraordinary, I think.
Great. So
got time for a couple more questions.
A few more coming in. Helena's got an interesting one. Oh no, sorry, Lily. She's asking why we didn't put observation windows in the brood box of the hive.
Okay, that's a great request. If you've got any requests of features that you would like, then let us know whether you want observation windows in the brood box. Now, there are people that say, no, just leave it better insulation down the bottom. However, in the more temperate climates, it could be a nice feature to have observation windows down here as well.
Great. Another question coming in asking how long it would take till you get to the stage where you can harvest honey.
So that really does depend on the strength of your colony. If you've got a lot of bees and that coincides with a good nectar flow, i.e. the flowers are producing a lot of nectar that the bees can go and get, then things can happen very quickly. The fastest I've ever seen it from setting up a hive to harvesting is 2 weeks, but that's an extreme scenario. And normally you'll be happy if you get some honey in that first season. And you don't always. Perhaps your colony was weak for some reason, or perhaps there was fire or there was flood or something that limited the amount of nectar available for your bees. The way it works is you need some nectar availability to trigger the bees to really build up their numbers. Then you need continued nectar availability to get stores beyond what's keeping them alive. And if they are storing a lot of honey, then we can share some too.
Great. Helena, she's in Melbourne, Bellarine Peninsula. She's asking when she should take her super off. I don't think it gets below 0 in winter there.
So my sister keeps bees in your region, and I believe you are reducing the size of your hive as winter approaches. So what you need to do in your region is make sure there's enough stores for the bees to survive a few months without being able to forage for flowers. And ask some local beekeepers how much honey that is, but usually in your area you want probably half a box of honey for the bees to consume, because what they'll do to keep warm and survive that winter with no flowers and cold temperatures is they'll disconnect their wing muscles, they'll eat honey to fuel themselves, and they'll vibrate to keep warm by going down cells and being what's called heater bees. They can maintain their brood nest at a stable temperature and survive. Now, it is typical for the queen to slow down or stop laying when it gets really cold, and the bees are really just bunkering down until such time as the weather warms up again and the bees can start flying. Now, in our area, we're in a subtropical region, we actually get good honey flows all through the winter. So we don't have to go through that phase of packing down the hive a little bit for winter. So if you've got multiple boxes on, which is typical in the colder climates, you might be taking one of them off to shrink it down to a configuration just like this, so they can keep the hive warm through that winter more easily. Another tip is take the excluder out, which sits between these two boxes typically, and it's a grid that stops the queen getting up and laying in your honey boxes. You don't want the queen to be left behind if the ball of bees is huddling together and moves up to consume honey in your top box and leaves the queen behind to perish.
Thanks, Seeds. An important one and probably a good one to wrap up on. We've got a question from Crabs Creek Cottage. They've just joined the live. They've got a new hive set up and they're asking if it's safe to put some bricks on top of the roof to help anchor it during the impending cyclone.
There you go. There's another idea of adding more weight to the roof. You certainly could. You do have an issue where there's a bit of a slope here. So keeping your bricks on the hive might become the issue there. You might also benefit from a strap over the top, which is a simple thing to do, or a piece of rope or whatever you've got just to really hold it together. A step further would be to tie that strap to the ground, which you could do by putting these through Besser blocks, which are concrete blocks with holes in them, or you could put those concrete blocks under the feet and strap through them. But we do find that it's rare for hives to actually blow over. But the important thing, if you do get your hive toppling over, is to get it back on its feet with that day if you can. If it's left for too long on its side, the bees usually abscond or the hive beetles take over, taking advantage of the comb that's squashed against comb, and that bees can't service all comb areas, and the hive beetles can take advantage. So if your hive does tip over, just get out there in your bee suit and your gloves and your smoker, put it back together as soon as you can. So we do have a tropical cyclone approaching here. Tomorrow night it's going to be coming onshore. Main thing is be safe. Don't be silly trying to save your bees in the middle of the cyclone. Look after yourself, look after your family, and make sure you've done your prep prior to that cyclone approaching. Thanks for watching, and thanks for all of your great questions. Also let us know what you'd like us to cover next week, and we'll be back with another show and tell. And fingers crossed for all of you out there in the cyclone and flood